Dr. Lasnoski, welcome. How are
Great
you?
to be here. I'm doing really well today. Thanks a lot
Yeah.
for bringing me on.
Yeah, no, we're excited. There's a lot to talk about. Seems like we've already been hitting on a bunch of subjects that will could probably occupy the whole podcast. But um, I really just wanted to get your thoughts on this big change in your life that's coming up. You're going to be running a college here in 6 months.
Yeah,
Oh.
God's pretty funny. He throws things in front of you. Yeah, I've been at Wyoming Catholic College for 9 years, and the Bishop of Springfield, Bishop Thomas John Paprocki, heroic bishop. Everybody should be looking at
Springfield, Mass, or Springfield,
Springfield,
Illinois?
Illinois.
Okay.
Springfield, Illinois. Yeah, he's really leading the way for the bishops in America. I'm really proud of him, and so he and I were in touch. I used to teach at a university in his diocese.
Okay.
I got a hold of him um, last year for a canonical question because he's an expert in canon law.
Yeah.
And he says, you know what? I'm starting up this school and I'd really love for you to come and help out. Wow. Okay. What kind of school? And he says, well, I'd love to have a junior college trade school
Okay.
that is also seriously Catholic and great books.
Okay.
So basically, you've got uh, you've got a what amounts as a 3-year program.
Okay.
Okay, and you end up with an associate's in liberal arts and 3 years of trade work.
Wow.
Yeah. So the first year is this really cool foundations year where you get exposed to. We're going to do about 6 to 8 trades.
Okay.
Through a module program where you're working in each of those trades and learning each of those trades. At the end of the year or anywhere throughout the year, you can start an apprenticeship with a local contractor or with a local union. And then in the next 2 years, you are finishing up the associate's degree while you get the on-the-job training and the technical training in that particular trade. So it's really cool because what we're going for is a restoration of the dignity of work.
Okay.
In combination with pursuit of holiness, pursuit of life in community, a restoration of masculinity, at least to start. We're going to have women involved eventually, but we want to start with just men and try and get that right.
Okay.
And then also we're trying to work on the life of the mind. It shouldn't be weird. We have to get rid of this dichotomy that says, well, if you work in the trades, you don't think. Right. Or you're not concerned with the life of the mind. It's just craziness, right? So I want our students to be talking about theology while they're building something beautiful.
Okay.
And I guess the inspiration for the college comes from the words of Christ to St. Francis of Assisi, right? Rebuild my church. Rebuild my church. So the college is called San Damiano College for the
San
Trades.
Damiano. Okay.
Right. Yeah. It's beautiful. And the two religious orders that are behind it in the background are the Franciscan Brothers of the Holy Cross. They ran a trade school in Springfield
Okay.
from 24, I want to say 24 to 72.
Okay.
Okay.
1924, didn't it?
1972. That range could be 30s. So forgive my mistake on that, but they ran a trade school for that time. And they transitioned it into a school for folks with developmental disabilities.
Okay.
Right. So we're going to use their portions of their campus. We have a shop that we're going to remodel that's in one of their buildings. The other part of the campus is from the Hospital Sisters of St. Francis. Okay. And so they built this beautiful campus with a retreat center and one of the most spectacular churches you're going to see anywhere.
That sounds awesome.
St. Francis of Assisi. Yeah. It's beautiful. So they're in the background providing some of this infrastructure for the college.
Yeah. And
we're coming in to fill that infrastructure with this program, with this mission, with this inspiration. The other cool thing about it, well, there's so many, is that we've got the Norbertines. You probably know about the Norbertines from St. Michael's Abbey in California.
Okay.
They have started a dependent priory called Corpus Christi Priory in Springfield at this location. They started it a year ago almost. And so they are going to serve as chaplains for this community. And we're going to have a heavy focus on discernment, right? There's going to be a real program of discernment for these guys to go through.
For like a vocational discernment.
Yeah, what
Okay.
vocation capital V, vocation small v, right? Like,
Mhm.
what are you called to do? How are you supposed to be a saint? Is that as a priest? Is it as a layman? Right? Are you supposed to get married? What are you supposed to do? And then, small v, right? Are we talking plumbing, HVAC? Are we talking ecclesial restoration? What are we doing here?
Yeah.
So all
Yeah.
kinds of cool opportunities for these guys to get a degree, but to become a man of Christ who is restoring what this world which is, integrity
Yeah. Yeah.
and the dignity of work.
Yeah. I hate to bring your mic about 6 inches closer
Sure, yeah.
towards you. I think we're going to get some better audio.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Questions abound.
Yeah.
So you're going to start with all guys.
Yeah.
And then these modules you're talking about. So it's going to be, hey, 6 weeks of welding and an introduction to that. 6 weeks of electrical. Is 6 weeks? Am I just pulling this number out of the air, or?
No, you could do 6 weeks.
Yep.
In order to get enough of these modules in, we're probably going to have to go down to something more like a 3 to 5 week,
Mhm.
right? With an academic semester being 13 weeks,
Okay.
that's probably what we're going to end up with. Some will be 3, some will be 5.
Yeah.
And the official launch of the college as an institution will be on June 19th. The bishop is going to make an announcement out at the campus. We're hoping to get some media out there to cover this event, and it's going to be really exciting. We're bringing in a lot of contractors and folks to be a part of that event. So, but yeah, so in our initial group of trades, we're looking at roofing is huge. And we're working with this company Tremco, and we're going to have a roofing module
Yep.
right away. And so folks can step into that. There's a lot of cool things going on in that space.
Yeah.
We're also going to have carpentry, obviously.
Yep.
And the Carpenters Union is really excited about working with us.
Yeah.
Illinois, it's a big union state, so a lot of work there with unions, but there are also non-union folks. For example, the roofing company I mentioned, that's going to be a non-union
Okay.
situation.
Well, they're probably really excited to hear that you're going to have guys who are interested in something other than the pleasures that money can give them as soon as they're off work, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's, I think, a huge challenge in the trades is, and I hear this from guys who have their own companies, is, man, it's so hard to find people who are just good citizens and who are also willing to work in the business that I work in.
That's right. It's kind of funny because the bar that they're setting is pretty low when I talk to them. Like, could you get me a guy who will show up, right, and want to work and be excited about working here and contribute responsibly? And I say, yeah, I mean, we're going to have not only those guys, but these guys are going to be your best. Right? They're going to be your best workers because they're going to be engaged. They're going to be men of integrity, and they're going to have a lot of energy for the work. And they're going to be trained in how to think through problems, and how to communicate not only with you, but with clients and with each other and work on teamwork.
Right.
One of the kind of cool things that we're going to do is, again, much like Wyoming Catholic College's 3-week, trip when students arrive, we're going to try to do something similar in the trades with like a freshman build. So
oh my God.
You show up and we throw you into a build scenario, right? Which is going to be, of course, supervised and just let them learn and let them build something.
Right.
So there's one guy I'm talking to right now, John Hyde. He's got a playground construction company. And so one of the ideas is we'll throw these guys into a few groups and have them work with John Hyde on building a playground, right? You show up to college and then and you come back from that, we debrief it, we give some content about the meaning of teamwork, the meaning of, like, we could do like a whole theology of work for those first 3 weeks when people show up. It's gonna be totally cool.
Right. Right.
Really cool.
I remember the Israeli army, I think this was in the 60s, would have various exercises to identify potential leaders for tactical applications in the field. And there was challenges like, all right, here's a wall, here's a log, you're a team of like 8 guys, you got to get the entire team from one side of the wall to the other side of the wall, using only this log, and you got to get everyone up and over onto the other side, and you can't touch the wall. Like, no one can touch the wall. So you got to figure out how to make a bridge. Anyway, so these were very, very popular. But unfortunately, what they were finding is that there was basically no correlation between guys who excelled in these very artificial challenges, how to get from one side of a wall to the other using only a log, to guys who naturally rose to the top in tactical applications. Yeah, I mean, you'll remember the invasion of the Israeli army into Lebanon, I think in 1982, and then of course all the conflicts that Israel has gone through before that. It occurs to me that something like a build which is so practical, is so obviously hands-on, might be a great way to identify leaders and standouts because the consequences are so real, right? You're trying to make something very, very practical that will stand even after you're done building it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little less contrived than something like let's use a log to get over a wall, right? I mean, you have to put up this playground and you have to do it right. Otherwise it's gonna fall apart and
right. Yeah. No dead kids,
Yeah. So I think identifying folks and encouraging them in leadership right away is going to be important in building those bonds.
Yeah.
Another thing I want to do in that zone is to do something kind of strange in the liberal arts Catholic world. Is we're going to do pilgrimages, but we're going to do pilgrimages for credit. Okay, so we're going to be going to places like Italy, right, and doing pilgrimages and having reflections on them for credit. So one of the guys I'm talking to is Altum, right? Altum, I forget the name. Baker, right?
Chris Baker.
Chris Baker.
Yeah. He used to be my roommate.
Okay, alumnus of WCC, right? So he's doing great things. And so we've been in touch with him and we're going to try to design some trips with him around the world for these students to get out to places of holiness, to exert themselves in the pursuit of being close to God together, and reflect on it in a way that's helpful for them.
Right.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we don't have guys like wandering around great cathedrals being like, that's not code. That's out of compliance.
No, it's probably won't be that. But in thinking of the ways to get some of these liberal arts pieces in with the trades has been kind of interesting. So you bring up the cathedrals, so I'll mention it here. I'm going to try to get an integration class to get our Euclid mixed with architectural history. Right? Let's talk angles. Let's talk circles. Right? Let's do all of that in the context of beautiful buildings. Right? And so that's one of the ways. Another is we're not just going to do a rhetoric course. Right? We're going to do rhetoric with business skills. Right? So you can aim it at, okay, well, in what kind of communication are you going to need to have? Well, let's do that convincingly, but let's do it in a business space as well, because you're going to need to, especially if you start your own business.
Okay.
Right. So that's some of the kind of things we're looking at doing differently.
Okay.
Another thing is like pedagogically, the kind of guys who are going to be attracted to this school are probably saying, all right, I'm done with high school. I'm finally can get out from behind a desk. I never want to sit behind a desk again. I want to go do things and build things. Right. So if we say to those guys, hey, come to San Damiano College where you have class and then you get to go build stuff, they're not going to be excited because of the word class, right? So we're not going to be sitting behind desks. We're not going to be, even when we have our classes, so to speak, we're going to be up, we're going to be standing, we're going to be walking around. I want to employ that more ancient method of disputatio, right? I want people coming to class ready to argue, right? So we're going to have theses, and we're going to have people ready to argue one side or another of a thesis and go from there. I think it's going to be really exciting.
Okay.
And then we're not just going to be sitting around with guys falling asleep, at the tables.
Yeah. I mean, that's such a challenge for young men who are particularly who are inclined to be out and moving. And I think there's a deeply creative instinct in many young men. I don't know that it would be, I would say all of, but my experience, I've been around the trades for probably 15 years now. And there's this creative instinct that needs nourishing.
Yeah.
Well, I've learned too from there's a guy I follow, his name's Jim Quick, and he does a lot on like optimizing your reading skills, your learning skills, memory, and all of that. And he was saying that we're made to learn with motion.
Mm.
So like using our body to learn information is very beneficial. So we said if you can get more senses, like you smell it, you feel it, you touch it, you're moving your body. A lot of like cross pattern stuff of like moving your hands across your middle line will be like crossing the hemisphere in your brain, but essentially it allows you to speed out the process of learning things.
Mm.
So I think it'll be really good for guys. Like I know I always love, that mode of learning when you're on the job, you're learning as you go,
Mm.
putting it all together.
Yeah.
Being in the fresh air is always nice, like being outside.
Yeah. So I think, there's so many crises in higher education right now. And, one of them is just the moral depravity of most of the schools where people are being sent, and parents don't want to send their kids to these places, right? They want a place where their kid's going to be taught not only what the truth is, but how to live the truth. So that's obviously something in our community life we want to latch onto. But I think one of the real crises that we can't say enough about is the financial crisis of higher education, right? There's a kind of spiraling inflation to uncontrollable inflation to the costs of higher education right now.
Yeah.
And the amount of debt that students are being asked to take out in order to get to college is pretty much absurd. So when I'm thinking through this school, when the board of directors think through this school and the motivations and the dreams behind it, its mission, one of those is around the way college is paid for, right?
Okay.
So we have a totally different model for this.
Oh,
Obviously, we're not going to be doing federal financial aid.
okay. So no FAFSA.
Okay, so no FAFSA.
Yeah.
But what we do want to have is a pay-as-you-go model where students are asked to pay a certain amount from the hours they're working during the school year. So they come to school freshman year. Well, let's start before that. They apply and they get in and they get accepted and they commit.
Yeah.
The summer before they show up, we're asking them to work a job. We're asking them to work hard. And they come to school with some cash and they put that down as the start of their tuition. Then they're going to be working 24 hours a week in a job related to their trade. They don't know exactly which trade they're going to want, but they're going to be 24 hours a week.
So that first year they'll move around in different.
They may or may
different-
not.
They
but
may or may not.
They
Okay.
may just stay in the same job, right? But the curriculum at the school will be having these modules, but their
Okay.
job out in the community will probably just be one thing.
Okay.
So they're going to be working 24 hours a week at that job. They'll pay a set amount from that, right, toward the tuition in the fall and the spring. Then they come back and they get into their apprenticeship and they go out for the summer. They're working 40 hours a week, making some pretty good money in an apprenticeship. We're going to ask them to bring a certain dollar amount of that back with them in the fall and set that down. Then the second year, they're only working 24 hours a week again during the school year, but they're making a little bit more money, right?
Okay.
They've got more experience. And so we have a different payment amount that they bring. Then again, the next summer, they're working 40 hours a week or more, and they're going to be asked to bring a certain chunk of that back.
Okay.
And then in their third year, this is where things change. The third and final year, you're working 40 hours a week. And you do daily mass, you're doing liturgy of the hours with the Norbertines, you're in the Schola, and you're doing your 40 hours a week, and you're doing once a week a seminar class for 3 hours in the evening. You're going to be asked to bring a significant portion of that 40 hours a week income to pay for the rest of your education.
Wow.
So what happens is you're only paying what you can afford every year.
Sure.
You graduate debt-free,
Yeah.
and you never had to take out a loan. So in the first year, you're not paying the full amount of the tuition. In the second year, you're basically paying right around the full amount. Third year, you're basically making up for what you couldn't pay the first year.
Wow.
Right.
Okay.
So that's going to require us to have really good retention rates.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's going to be a problem. I think people are going to want to stick around for the community. They're going to love it. They're not going to want to leave. If you look at what's happening at places like Harmel Academy for the trades, they're doing a really good job. The students who are graduating from Harmel Academy, they are begging to stick around and have like bonus years.
Okay.
Right? That's just
Whoa.
how amazing and it's because of the community. So Harmel's looking for ways of keeping these guys around and having continued formational community with these guys. So I think it's pretty awesome. So again, destroying the spiral of debt is something we're really committed to at this college. And I think it's going to work.
You would have experienced that firsthand as you moved from undergrad to graduate work. I mean, I think our audience being varied as it is, I mean, can you just walk us through the historical factors that play there? I mean, when I was in college admissions, the explanation always was, hey, students want more options at the cafeteria, that we want big buildings, we want really luxurious dorms. I mean, these were the narratives that were given. But what's your take having seen it firsthand?
Yeah, I think, well, I had a very strange experience. I went to an Ivy League school myself, and so I had all kinds of choices at the dorms and all kinds of choices at the food mart. So, you'd go into the dining hall and there was a personal chef there making just whatever you wanted.
And
Right. And so
was your 19-year-old self excited at that? I mean, were you like, oh yeah, I've come to the right place. Like I can get a burger or I can get sushi. This is awesome. Or your 19-year-old self, I can
my
get both.
19-year-old self, my 19-year-old self didn't have the virtue that I would want the men to have who come to San Damiano College. I mean, I went to college for mostly the college I went to for mostly the wrong reasons. Right? I went because of prestige. I went, the good reason was I wanted to go somewhere I didn't really know anyone and kind of do my own thing and kind of make myself see what I could be if I were thrown into a much bigger pond than from where I came from and see who I really was. So that was good, but I could have done that at UW-Madison, but I chose to do that at the University of Pennsylvania, which was cooler to me because it was more prestigious, right? And so again, wrong reasons. God used all that though, and for the good, just every wrong turn, every sin I've ever done, God has been able to bring good out of that. So, I think I think the problem with what you're mentioning is that we're training students, training kids, training young adults to want the wrong things and value the wrong things. So college is, when you go to college, you're going to form habits, and those habits are going to be the kinds of things that stay with you for the rest of your life. So a lot of students go to college saying, this is my 4 years to do all the irresponsible things like get wasted on a Friday and Saturday and Thursday now too, Thirsty Thursdays.
Thursday, Wasted Wednesday.
Wasted Wednesdays, yeah, Token Tuesdays. So there's all of and then students say, well, when I graduate, then I'll start being virtuous. It doesn't work that way, right? You need to form the habits and the virtues now if you want to live them later. And so we are trying to form a school that trains people to value the right things and form the right habits. So what are we looking at for dining? Let's talk about dining. We're going to have one hot meal a day, and that's for everybody. And then breakfast and lunch, we're going to have staples, and you're going to make a breakfast for yourself after morning mass.
Right.
And then you're going to either go to class or go to work. If you go to work, you're going to pack a lunch. Right? You're gonna do it responsible, like you would if you were a real working man. Right? You're not going out to a fancy meal on your lunch break, typically. Right? So we want to train these people to value the right things. And one of those is frugality. But another one of those is celebration and community. And so we're gonna do a hot meal every evening, and we're gonna get together. We're gonna talk about the spiritual insights from the day, the intellectual insights from the day, and the insights from work. Maybe you had a great evangelical conversation with someone at your work site. Right. Let's share about that.
Right. Someone who, you were right. Perhaps you are the first person they've met in their life that is working the same job they are, but has thought about life beyond 2 weeks from today.
Yeah. Or just beyond the weekend.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, I've got buddies in the trades who say they've switched to paying the weekly paycheck on Monday because that is the best way to that's the best way to get people to show up on Monday. But they are also getting feedback that from wives and girlfriends, like, yeah, when there's not, say $1,500 there on Friday, it's a lot. If you don't have $1,500 in cash on Friday, it's a lot harder to waste it all on drinking and other things over the weekend.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, in the interests of the business, people will show up when they know there's cash coming.
Yeah.
But also that Monday paycheck means that you're not tempted. It's not easy to give into the temptations because you just don't have all that money burning in your pocket.
Right.
But yeah, it's that day ahead thinking, right? I'm thinking now to 24 hours from now. That's it.
I think, these guys are going to be salt and light, right? They're going to be going out into the world and bringing Christ with them, bringing integrity with them, and just raising up the entire world around them, right? Like a tide raises all the boats,
Okay.
But at the same time, like, I don't want us sitting here thinking, oh man, the trades is where people without virtue are, right? We go, I've met
Virtue is lacking everywhere.
it's pretty equal opportunity vice in this world, right? You see it everywhere. So what I clearly do not want to be saying is that somehow vice is concentrated in the trades. In fact, it's quite the opposite. I mean, I go out and I talk to tradesmen. They're the most wonderful, solid, right, hardworking people you're ever going to want to know. And so what they're looking for, right, these virtuous tradesmen are more people to pass on their wisdom. They want people to pass on their wisdom, their skill, and their knowledge to. Right? That's what they're looking for. It's not that you just want cogs in a wheel. Right? You go out there to that guy who's 60 years old. He's been working in electrical for his whole life, or someone who's a high skilled craftsman in woodworking. They don't just want a warm body. They don't just want a cog in a wheel. They want someone to tradition down the wisdom of the ages.
Right.
And
right.
that's the kind of guys we want at San Damiano. People who are interested in the task of taking up a tradition, not just tradition of the trades, right? That's part of it, but the tradition of your faith, tradition of the liturgy, tradition of the intellectual life, right? Which brings me back to another kind of really cool element is, WCC is known for a lot of things. One of them is the Living Latin program, right? Wyoming Catholic. And at the same time, it tends to be one of the higher hurdles for students to get over.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I want our students to be engaging Latin because it's the language of the church. It's the official mother tongue of our mother, Holy Church.
Right.
And so I want them to be engaging it. And I think they're going to want to be engaging it. But we're going to slightly do that a slightly different way. We're going to work that through where everybody who's enrolled in the college is necessarily enrolled in Schola and Acolyte.
Wow.
Okay, so it's going to be a split class, right? So you're going to learn to chant in the Latin, and you're going to learn how to serve Mass, and you're going to learn the history of the liturgy, right? So it's a beautiful way of saying, this is the way we're going to start engaging these guys in Latin, not just by doing charts, not even by the amazing kind of living Latin that Wyoming Catholic does, right? It's one of a kind, but a way of engaging that's not going to be quite as frightening or off-putting to some of these guys who would say, I don't really want to go and take a class on Latin, but it's valuable to me. I want to be familiar with Latin, but I don't really want to go study Wheelock's Latin or whatever.
Okay. What will you do okay, so you're going to have guys doing Catholic Schola, serving Catholic masses. I mean, if you get someone who's a non-Catholic or not practicing Catholic and they're like, yeah, man, I'm really excited about what you guys are doing. What's going to be your approach there?
I think, you welcome that person in open arms, right?
Yeah.
You get them to sing as much Schola as they possibly can. And I think you say, they're saying, hey, I'm really excited about this Mass. Like, this is blowing my mind. Like, I never knew this existed.
Yeah.
You get them to continue learning about it. And they can learn everything about being an acolyte.
Sure.
But obviously we wouldn't have them serving at the altar until they would come into communion with the church.
Okay.
In the same way, like, look, everyone's going to go on pilgrimage.
Yeah.
Whether you're Catholic or not, it doesn't mean you have to have, we're not going to grade people on, how many Hail Marys did you say, right? It's going to be a lot like the experiential learning program at WCC, right? Where the content, it's not about, did you have a personal conversion, right, of some kind. At the same time, we're also going to have built-in retreats, right? So again, there's a thing where if you're not a Catholic, well, we're going to have to find an alternative for you to do a silent experience, right? That's spiritually engaged. But yeah, the life of retreat, the importance of retreat in anyone's life is irreplaceable. So we got to keep fostering that.
Right. Even you could say that even in a very secular sense, taking time away from the anxieties and tasks of daily life is valuable to a human being, right? Even if in the same breath you're like, well, I don't know if they're praying to a higher power, or even if that higher power exists or whatever. It's like, no, but human beings clearly thrive when they have retreats from the daily hustle.
Yeah, no doubt. And getting people into silence, right? And that's a scary thing to be in for a Christian or a non-Christian, just silence. We're so afraid of it. We surround ourselves with every possible way of avoiding it. And so welcoming guys into that occasionally throughout the year is going to be really important.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. Well,
Reminds me-
who's ready to re-enroll?
I know, yeah. Cool.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
our website is now discoverable on the internet, and it's sandamianotrades.org. Sandamianotrades.org. So we're in the initial fundraising
Right.
portion. So we encourage, anybody to go check it out, send me emails, especially support us, because we need to get the right amount of capital in order to fulfill this goal that I'm mentioning about, no debt, no loans, pay as you go. We're not gonna be able to do that unless we get enough capital.
Right. You gotta get that ignition point.
Yeah.
As of course, you and I were coworkers. But as I think our audience knows, I used to be in admissions for a couple of different Catholic colleges. So I'm always curious about the recruitment side. What's going to be your sales pitch to someone who's considering, wow, I don't even know what I want in college? Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of ways, a lot of angles at that pitch. I think the first one is, well, we have a structural discernment program in our first year.
Yeah.
So what better place to come and figure out what God's calling you to do than San Damiano College? Secondly, you don't know what you want to do. Okay, how about you get exposed to 6 different trades and learn a little bit about each of them and work in 1 or 2 of them over the course of 3 years. You're not sure what you want to do. Okay, well, how about whatever you do, you avoid taking out a bunch of debt. Well, you're going to do that at San Damiano. You're going to avoid debt at San Damiano. So you're not sure what you want to do. Well, why don't you learn the liberal arts so that you become a person who knows how to learn, right? Has learned how to learn and can think clearly and isn't going to be taken along for a ride like some rabbit, or sheep in a bad way.
Well, that's both the blessing and the curse of the university, right? Is that it's typical student, an 18-year-old, you're accepting them at a time when their mind is probably at its most open, combined with at its most intelligent, right? But that is both a opportunity, but also an opportunity for great harm, right?
Yeah.
Like people are very, frankly, tend to be more accepting at that age than they are in their 30s or 40s or beyond. And so, yeah, it's a great responsibility that these places of learning have. What are you putting in there?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're putting in the greatest things said in the greatest ways over human history.
Yeah.
And I mean, you're going to, in theology, the nice thing is you're going to have theology and humanities every semester for the whole time.
Okay.
Right. And so that's a commitment, right? You're always going to be engaging with the Word of God and the theologians of the ages, especially Thomas Aquinas. And you're going to be, I think another cool thing is that our theology curriculum builds into it the lives of the saints in a way that we're looking at men of discernment. We're looking at men who lead and women who lead in ways of living holy lives. We need people to have models for this, right? You're not going to be St. Francis of Assisi. You're not going to be Don Bosco, but you're going to be a saint who learns something from them and takes it to the extreme, right? So, yeah, I think a theology curriculum that gets people into the lives of the saints is going to be really important for us and for the culture out there. The other thing is with the humanities, right? You're exposing yourself to all of the beautiful and true things that have been said, but also the falsehoods and errors, right? Of the world out there that have been said in the most beautiful and compelling ways also. So, it's not about indoctrination and true opinion. It's about encountering the truth wherever it is and being able to learn from the truths and the errors that have been expressed throughout all of human history.
Right. So give us a day. Okay, so for a freshman, right, or a first year guy, just give us a typical day, like his daily schedule. I mean, what's the time in the field, so to speak, versus time, again, I'm going to say in the classroom, but
we already talked about that. Yeah.
Right.
So there's a number of ways you can organize this. I think the most likely scenario is that we do class days, or let's call it intellectual formation days on Mondays and Fridays, and work site days Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
Okay.
Okay, 'cause the contractors want these guys 8 hours a day for 3 days straight. They don't want to split that up, and I think that's a good move. So what's going to happen is, let's say it's an intellectual formation day, right?
Yeah.
You're going to wake up somewhere between 6 and 7. Maybe you do a workout. You're going to get to the 7 a.m. daily mass with the Norbertines. After that, you're going to get yourself a nice breakfast, and you're going to get out to the shop for your morning module, right, on whatever trade we're doing. You're going to have you're going to have a brief lunch, during which we're still going to do some intellectual formation and conversation, maybe even some testing.
Yep.
And then in the afternoon, you're going to be either in the shop or in the disputational classroom that we talked about
Okay.
for the afternoon.
When you say disputational, as in you're going to have to be able to defend a thesis in front of other students, professors as well, and argue for it intelligently.
And argue the opposite from what your fellow students are arguing. Right? And so we're going to have to teach people how to do that, right? You're not going to come knowing how to do that. It'll be a process.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then after that, right, you're going to have a break for dinner, and you can have vespers, and then there's going to be homework time, and we'll have either Compline or a rosary, and then more time of homework, and then you can hit the sack.
Right.
If it's a work day, right? So let's say moving on to Tuesday, you get up at 6 or whenever, maybe if you want to do your workout, that's good time. Hit your morning mass, make yourself a breakfast, eat it, get out to your work site, work your tail off, be the best person out there.
Yeah.
Come back. We're gonna have a nice hot dinner for everybody. And then we've got, again, Vespers Compline available for you. And then you've got more homework to do in the evening, and then rinse and repeat. Yeah. Weekends, of course, you'll have a little bit more time for yourself to go around Springfield or do whatever it is you might want to do socially. But yeah, the workload will be pretty intense.
Yeah.
Right. But we're gonna have the readings curtailed such that it's expected that they'll be able to get them done.
Okay.
Right. So that's gonna mean probably reading less of the great works than you might do at somewhere like Wyoming Catholic College, right? We may amend the catalog of ships in the Iliad. Don't tell. So,
right. Well, there's a chance that you may be out building a ship. I don't know.
That's right. Who knows? Yeah. So that's kind of the way it goes. And then there'll be special events. We're going to try and have dances and barbecues and outdoor trips. And of course, there's the pilgrimages, and we're going to try and get some works of mercy in there, and the retreats and things like that as well.
Yeah. Okay. Dances. All right. So where are these guys going to go for dates?
Well, that's one of the reasons we're interested in having it be a co-ed school ultimately, right? Is to build that community. But within Springfield, it's a town of 100 and something thousand people, and the Catholic community there is growing and vibrant. In fact, when I showed up for a visit to this campus, there just happened to be a young adults Catholic group happening on that Sunday, and there were a host of really great, holy, intellectual, wonderful people there hanging out, trying to grow in community. So there are folks of both sexes around. Yeah. But I think, we do want to make it a community where people are not simply isolated by sex.
Right.
Yeah, long term. And I don't know how quick we'll be able to get to that. I think it's going to happen fairly quickly. But we really want to set the college up on the right standing, get a structure and a system that works before trying to make it too complicated.
Yeah. Right. Wow.
I was wondering, are you familiar with Henry Ford's work, his book, My Life and Work?
Heard of it, not read it.
It's really interesting.
I'll check that out.
He actually built a school when he was doing well.
Okay.
For orphan kids.
Okay.
So for orphan boys, they would come and they would do classroom time, and then they would work on parts, so they learn how to build stuff. And a lot of those parts were used in the cars
Oh, okay.
So they were building simple stuff, but they were actually earning wages from the work they're building for the cars.
Okay.
Mm.
So they actually came out with a little bit of net income from their time there.
Nice.
And when they came out, they were a certified Ford mechanic.
Wow.
So they could be run a dealership or go into the factories.
Okay.
And he said it was a profitable school. They didn't have any debt, and the kids were. So
Yeah.
it sounds very similar to what you're doing.
It's really, yeah. I mean, I think the model we're trying to create is different from what's going on in higher ed, right? In higher ed, you have so many institutions that need to raise 20, 30, 40, 50 or more percent of their operating expenses in donations,
Mhm.
right? And that just strikes me as unsustainable.
Mhm.
So if, I've been putting a lot of effort into trying to design a budget and a model that actually is budget neutral on tuition alone, right?
Mhm.
And at the lowest would need to raise 15% of operating expenses.
Mhm.
Okay, and even I think that would be a really good mark to hit.
Yeah.
But I think we can actually get to a place where the college just would raise money for things like the endowments, for things like a capital campaign to build a new shop or dorms, right? Rather than needing it for operation expenses. And
Mm.
that's a cruising altitude that it's going to take us a few years to get to.
Right.
But once we get to that cruising altitude, I think we have the model dialed in.
Yeah. That's amazing. I mean, I know so many kids are always, especially now, are like, well, is it worth taking out 200 grand to go to school?
Mhm.
Mhm.
And it's like a lot of people are saying, like, well, I mean, you can learn a lot of stuff online. You can probably make your way through it with a lot less money, even though you won't have the kids. So this is perfect. You'll be able to be in a community, learn the skills, and be debt free.
Yep.
I remember I think I got a third date with a girl because I was chatting with her on the phone, and she, like, one of her roommates had clogged the toilet, so the toilet was starting to overflow.
Oh.
And, like, over the phone, I was like, whoa, okay, all right, do this. Now, all right, turn off the water. All right, now take the top off the tank. All right, here's what you need to look for. You know what I mean? And I fixed it over the phone with her. And I promise you that helped me get, like, just a little bit farther. Like, all right, this is a guy who knows some stuff, you know?
Yeah, it's great. And the other thing is too, if we teach these guys about, beautiful English country dancing,
Finish it.
okay,
Yeah.
and other types of social dancing, I think those kind of experiences and are going to make them more eligible bachelors
Yeah.
as well, so to speak.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've actually been thinking about this and talking with a few almost graduates now about the idea of work. It seems like the man is made to go in the wild and build the domicile, and then the woman's supposed to
Mm.
decorate and make it a home.
Mm.
So it's like there's always that urge for men to like be builders, like men are, it's weird, like the things we think about are cars, buildings,
Right.
it's all
Right.
about building stuff. Like even in the fitness world, it's like how can you build? Like
Right.
are you
Right.
capable of being a master at something? Or like jujitsu or like
Yeah.
martial arts. It's always like, are you a master?
Mm-hmm.
There's that beautiful scene in the Iliad, when the Odyssey, excuse me. And Odysseus comes back home, and he has this conversation with Penelope about the bed
Yep.
that he built. And it's clear if you read it that this is a man who knows carpentry, and he knows what he's built, and he has an attachment to it even after 20 years of being away.
Yeah, and the proof that he is who he says he is that he understands and knows about the construction of this particular piece.
Right.
Right. So yeah, I think that's, the restoration of the meaning of work and its place in human life is really something philosophically and theologically that we're after.
Okay.
John Paul II in his letter Laborem Exertions,
Mhm.
which everyone's going to read in this curriculum, and talk about significantly, it has a beautiful reflection on why work is so important. He says in JP2 says in there that man is not made for work, but work for man, right? Like that man's purpose has always been found in working, right? Not that he's made and then work is this thing that enslaves him. Work is good for man, right? And even before the fall, even had there never been a fall,
Right.
man would have found his meaning in tending
Tending the
tilling,
garden. Yeah.
in making it more than what it was. And JP2 underscores this by saying the work of man is his participation in the creativity of God the Father.
Mm.
That's what it's all about. And if you look at the 6 days of creation, what do you see God doing? You see him, well, first of all, bringing something out of nothing. Well, we can't do that, right? We don't have that. But we can do the rest of it, which is the separating, right? He takes the day and the night and he separates it. He takes the waters above and the waters below, separates them.
Okay.
And then, so he orders.
Yeah.
God the Father orders things.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, he makes them more than they were. He fructifies them.
Mm.
Right? He brings fertility into them. And so we have the land that brings forth the plants. We have the birds of the air that bring forth more birds, and they order the skies, and the fish pass through the paths of the sea, and they order the sea. And so he commands everything that is to be fruitful and multiply, because that's what he does to creation. He makes it more.
Mm-hmm.
And so when man works, he imitates God, right, in his creativity to divide and to fructify, to order and to fructify in love. It's so cool, right? And then what's the whole point of this? Well, Joseph Pieper's going to tell you it's ultimately leisure. And God will tell us it's leisure because that's the seventh day.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Uh-huh.
Where what's the point of work? Well, it's ultimately to rest in the goodness. Rest in the goodness of what's been made.
Yeah.
Right? And so we need to renew that work isn't just about, well, I go and get a paycheck. It's about doing something that makes the world more and better than it was before.
Yeah. 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 There's a stewardship there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen that lived out in real life. I remember visiting a couple, they were probably in their 50s and they owned this beautiful little farm down in Pennsylvania. And we were sitting, I was recruiting their son, to be honest. Yeah. Trying to get them to go to the college I was working for at the time. But anyway, we were sitting around having this amazing meal, wine and steak, and he had barbecued these steaks out on this beautiful patio that he had built himself. But so because of this, we started talking about all the work that he and his wife had done when they were in their early 20s, just bought this brambly, forgotten, worn down farm in the middle of Pennsylvania. And then this is a supposition, but I suppose over the next 10 years or so, cleared back the brambles, put in a lawn, put in a patio, put up a great spot to picnic, a great spot to barbecue. So yeah, it was wonderful. I want to talk more about this. In a surprise turn of events, Father James Schumacher's come south back to the banana belt of Wyoming and has some time. So he's going to join us, especially as we get into our second half of our discussion. Kent, you and I had been tossing around some ideas about talking about politics and the faithful Catholic life. Yeah. Father's like, the wine's not strong enough.
Scotch.
Yeah. Specifically what's been on my mind, and both of you gentlemen can, I think, shed a lot of insight into this is, and Father, you and I have talked about compromises in the political life. Can we just get your thoughts on how are Catholics who have their eyes on heaven, to what extent, how much energy are they going to put into the political life here on earth, and what principles should guide the would-be Catholic politician or just the would-be Catholic citizen?
Wow, well, so much to say there. I think I'm going to go ahead and say some maybe strange sounding things at the risk of saying what I really think.
No, that's what we do here at the Green Dragon.
Nice far, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's good. The role of the Catholic within society and civil society and the state has always been from day one onward to be the soul to the body, right? That which gives life and order to the material surroundings, right? And the soul loves the body, right, dearly, and wants it to be ordered correctly. And so a Catholic who's following Christ as a member of civil society and a state, a nation, needs to love that civil society, love that nation, and do everything he or she can to order it in accord with the will of God, his natural law and his eternal law and his divine law. So that's just hands down soul to the body. Okay.
Hmm.
The problem is, well, there's many problems. The most straightforward problem is that the body doesn't really like the soul, right? The body resents the soul because the soul tells the body, how about you don't have that fourth donut,
Mm.
right? The soul tells the body, you know what, maybe you should sleep this many hours, but not more than that,
Mm.
right? The soul tells the body, we're going to need to go do some exercise so that you can function correctly, right? The soul pushes down and back against the passions of the body for the body's good, and the body resents that. And so the minute, and that's just a fundamental reality, right? And this analogy comes from the Epistle to Diognetus from the 3rd century in early Christianity. There's a hilarious story about how it was found that I won't tell now, but the point is that this is just the fundamental truth of Christians in civil society and the state is that they will have tension. Okay?
Mm.
There will be tension. And I think Catholics need to accept that and live into that and I think own it. And so one thing that I reflect on is that the day when Catholics became safe, right? When they sort of came of age in America as safe candidates, I think ultimately Catholics are the best candidates for office, right? But when they became safe in a world that had been formerly dubious and skeptical and suspicious of Catholics as participants in society and the state, the day that they became safe, I think in some ways was a loss for Catholics, because it meant that Catholics had decided they were going to play by the rules of secular society. They were going to check their deeply held beliefs at the door and agree to a certain kind of secular civic dialogue that checks God talk, that checks divine law, that checks even the 10 commandments at the door when you come in and talk about legislation. We're going to legislate as if there weren't a God.
No, there's no real dialogue.
Yes, exactly.
Cardinal Walter Casper, who is by no means a rampaging traditionalist, but Cardinal Walter Casper once made the observation that the difficulty with so much interreligious dialogue is that the difficulty today with so much interreligious dialogue is that the Catholic partner doesn't speak. It's crucial to listen. St. James says, let everyone be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, slow to speak, but still speak.
Sorry, Father, sorry to interrupt. Can you just bring that mic
Yeah.
a little bit
So
closer?
For there to be a dialogue, you do have to listen, but you do have to speak. And you have to speak from the confidence that you actually have something to say.
Mm-hmm.
And you cannot, entering into a dialogue, you cannot accept ground rules that forbid you to speak from your fundamental principles.
Yes.
We cannot accept ground rules that say we are forbidden to speak from the perspective of faith, because this perspective of faith is who we are, not sola fides. Yes, reason seeks to understand faith, reason seeks to present it, but we must be able to speak from a perspective of faith, because that's who we are. And if we're not speaking as who we are, it is not, in fact, a dialogue.
Do you think that's how the notion of separation of church and state is interpreted, though?
Yes.
Yeah, I think certainly the notion, if you read Locke's, second letter and second treatise and his letter on religious toleration, it's pretty clear that if Catholics are going to be accepted, first of all, let's just say it right out. In his letter, he says Catholics are among the only two groups you can't tolerate, right? Catholics and atheists, right? Those are the two people you can't tolerate. You should tolerate everybody else. And that's because Catholics owe their allegiance to a foreign power, which is the Pope, and he was suspicious of that. But the fact is that if you look at that, he has an ecclesiology and anthropology in there that says, look, if you want to play this game, if you want to be part of this dialogue, this civic discourse, this legislative discourse, you're going to have to agree that religion is a private matter. At least the way you worship is a private matter. right? And if the way you worship is going to affect the kind of laws you make, we're going to have to limit that to the lowest common denominator. And the lowest common denominator in Locke's time was basically natural law, right? Everybody just accepted it, right? Whether or not you're Methodist, Lutheran, Presbyterian, Catholic, we can all come to this legislative session and agree about natural law. And
So
so we thought, yes. Now what happens, fast forward, right, to the to 2020, and you go to a legislative session.
Don't mention that. Here.
Sorry. You
Mike,
fast,
pick off.
fast forward, I mean, you could even say 1960s, right? Fast forward, and now you go to a legislative session and you cannot assume natural law as a lowest common denominator. That's the problem with the Lockean model, that we just need to find a discourse that everybody can agree on, right? Find that lowest common place of agreement and work there, because
To put it brutally,
that lowest common denominator keeps dropping.
put it
Right?
brutally, the Lockean model, which we were all taught was foundational to the United States. I question that personally,
Likewise.
but we're all taught that was foundational to the United States, has failed. The Lockean model is dead. We went down as a civilization, we went down the Lockean path, and it turned out to be a plank that led us to jump into shark-filled waters. So now we're treading water while trying to ward off the shocks of the sharks, and we have to come up with a very different way of addressing how different religious groups, different ideological groups are to collaborate socially. And I do think that the key word for that is honesty. Also charity. Charity enough to listen to what they have to say, but honesty in presenting our perspective, which we believe to be true on the basis of divine revelation, and not be embarrassed about saying that we believe this to be true on the basis of divine revelation.
Right.
Many will object, fine. This is who we are, and we must participate. It's our duty to participate, and there are enough of us we can't be kept from participating. So you may have to tolerate some faith talk. And that is not meant to be outrageously in your face. It's just saying, we do, in fact, exist. Our collaboration is, in fact, needed. And this is who we are.
Yeah.
Not seeking in a power game sort of way to impose that, but in the task of collaboration, the starting point has to be honesty. Honesty combined with charity. And that introduces, I think that leads us to a different kind of compromise, a different kind of collaboration than one based on trying to find a lowest common denominator that's no longer there.
Yeah.
Can you say more on what you mean when you say the Catholic Church and Catholics lost something when Catholic candidates in our own political system became safe? Does safe mean on the ballot?
Yeah, I mean the JFK moment, right? Where a Catholic stood up publicly and said, I'm not subject to the Pope, right? The Pope doesn't tell me what to do. I am an American. And American means I'm independent. I do my own thinking. I'm not fundamentally part of a larger authoritative group. I don't get my principles from anywhere else but me.
And instead of attempting any kind of nuance, because of course, the whole question of papal authority, how it relates to temporal affairs, is another issue.
Exactly, that's nuance. Yeah.
Certain amount of nuance. Papal claim to direct involvement in temporal affairs. That needs to be carefully adjudicated, and it's been thought about by highly intelligent people for centuries.
Hmm.
So, but there was no nuance there. There was just the
Yeah.
statement that I am not really in political matters guided by my faith.
Yeah. And again, when you can elect a Joe Biden who's basically just a slightly different flavor of vanilla from a Protestant or even a non-religious candidate, right? When his faith no longer matters, when it's a kind of decoration, right, on him, instead of being something so foundational to him that every decision, every judgment he makes about politics will come from the values and principles of that faith in some way or another, right? That's when Catholicism loses something, right? We're not being honest with ourselves about who we are when it comes to political engagement. We're acting as if somehow our Catholicism doesn't matter to the way we engage politically.
That brings us back to that keyword honesty.
Yeah.
This is who we are. Not to be in your face, as they say, but just to be straightforward, honest. This is who we are. We believe we can work together, not on the basis of trying to find a lowest common denominator in terms of moral and religious beliefs, but in terms of a common commitment to live together in peace and to have a functional society.
Right. And I think, if you go back to the letter on toleration and other works of Locke, the idea of what the Commonwealth is concerned with is limited to material goods, basically, right? Access to and protection of your own private material goods and those goods that we hold in common together, right? But the goal of the government then is limited down intentionally to those concrete goods. And it says, look, when it comes to forming people in virtue, we're going to take a very narrow approach to that. And there's a way in which that seems safe, right? To narrow that down, because
Clearly.
as we start getting in the weeds on, well, not only do we want people to have wealth as a nation, but we want them to be good people, to be happy people. Well, whose happiness, right? Whose definition of good, right? Well, whose definition of virtue, right? That's, I think, part of the risk of saying that the state is responsible for not only the material concrete goods, but for developing people and forming them to actually be happy and good in a deeper sense. If the state has a role in that, that's where things start to get scarier. And that's why people want to push back and say, no, the state shouldn't have anything to do with that, because we're all going to agree that we want cars, we want white picket fences, and we want nice houses with running water.
Right. And we want the cops to show up when we call 911
Exactly.
and police to firemen to show up when things are on fire. We all agree on that.
Yes. But do we
But
agree
you're saying that the idea of government should include more.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And not in terms of direct action by the government necessarily.
Hmm.
The church has fought long battles over her right to conduct her own affairs.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not direct action by the government in this area, but the government has an obligation to create a space in which the church can perform her ministry, which is profoundly beneficial to society.
Mm.
The pioneer sociologist Emil Durkheim famously observed that if you want to take the pulse, there's more to diagnosis than taking a pulse, but that's part of it. Take the pulse of a society's health. You take the pulse by looking at the suicide rate. Well, now, what do we have today? You take the pulse and it says we're kind of sick. You look at alcohol abuse rates, drug addiction, mental illness, and the severe social and, yes, economic costs of those. Can the state deal with these directly? No, it has not the competence, because these are moral and ultimately spiritual things. Here is what we can help. We can raise children in faith and in hope. How much of this is tied up with existential hopelessness? We can raise children in faith and in hope. We can teach people to have families that stay together. This we can do. The state needs to create a space in which we are able to do this. In that sense, it's collaborative. The church and the state not attempting to usurp each other's functions, but working in tandem.
Mhm.
The difficulty with the normal understanding, or I'm afraid is the normal understanding of separation of church and state, is that it tends to suppose that it's the state that really matters and the church is simply a private thing. No,
Akin to which gym you go to for exercise.
very much
Exactly,
akin.
yeah.
I'm a CrossFitter. No, I'm an Orthodox.
Yeah. I'm a
Oh,
Pilates guy. I'm a bodybuilder.
Yeah.
I'm a marathoner.
Akin to that, and it's not akin to that. The church has the task of forming the human person, a whole, healthy, happy human person. And that means, because we are social, that means the church has a social role. It must be social, it must be involved in education, it must be involved in charity. It must be involved in politics. When we say politics, say this cautiously, knowing that at some stage, the next several months, I'm going to have to face the fearsome task of producing a homily on voting in the election. But as the church's role in politics, well, automatically people will translate that into into partisan political terms, political parties and all that structure. But no, the church's role is to form people in those healthy, just, and charitable attitudes that need to underlie productive political activities. So it's what I have to call foundational politics, something more important than what party you belong to. Well, someone said of President James K. Polk, and there's so many like this. That's back in the 1840s, it's an old problem. Someone said of him, politics is his religion, and the Democratic Party is his church. And that's what we have today. That's what we've had since the 1840s, 1830s, 1820s. It's an old problem, but now, don't want to get too much into this, just look around, pay attention. It's killing us. It's killing us. There are too many people for whom politics is their religion, and it is a crappy religion. There are too many people from politics is their religion, too many people from the Democratic Party or the Republican Party is their church. Those have a role to play, but politics is a deeper thing than these parties. It is how just, honorable, and honest and charitable people live socially, live together, and work together. That's more fundamental. That's the church's role. It is a political role, but not political in the sense of what party do you belong to?
Yeah.
What candidate do you vote for? It has implications perhaps for that, but fundamentally it's deeper than that, distinct from that, prior to that.
So, Father, if I'm understanding you correctly, the church is going to have a felt and profound effect on a nation or just any political community if its members are trying to act as Catholics in their political life.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I just want to I want to back up and I want to get both of your thoughts. All right. What would each of you respond if someone, and I will say most of the Catholic men that I grew up around in the late 90s and early 2000s, they would have said, oh yeah, we got to get back to this Lockean natural law model of the government. The government basically enforces natural law, and beyond that, religion has no effect.
It's failed.
Right. So what would you say if the model that failed is the model didn't fail, but we got, oh, okay. That's what you would say. Yeah. I'm just wondering, if someone said, yeah, we lost our way from the model that was working, in which the government
was doomed to fail.
Okay. Kent, would you agree?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because again, it defined religion as out of bounds.
Okay.
All right. And so once you define faith talk, divine revelation as out of bounds for the legislative sphere, for the public discourse, the only reason natural law sticks around is the same reason a house would stick around if you ripped out its foundation. It'd
Mm.
stay around for a while. Did you get a good wind? That thing's falling over.
Okay.
It was an accident. It was an accident of history, right? Once people
It was an accident of history that
it
for
stayed
a
around
time,
for a time,
natural law was sort of the agreed upon common way.
That's right. But once you take out its undercurrent, which is a lawgiver,
Mm,
right?
okay.
This is a theological, concept.
Mm.
Once you take that away, and you discount the divine revelation, which underscores and explains the naturally knowable law, then that edifice on which it was built falls apart.
Hmm.
And we're seeing that now in our society. So yeah, I believe it was doomed to fail once we accepted the Lockean project.
Yeah. Locke understood the need for an ultimate lawgiver, so he excluded atheists.
That's right.
However, he failed to understand you cannot have religion generically apart from theology and doctrine.
Religion will always be specific.
It'll always
Yes.
be specific.
And if you read his letter on toleration, he provides his own specific ecclesiology, soteriology,
Mhm.
and anthropology. He's got his own theology. And
Mhm.
he's asking you and me as Catholics to buy his theology, and I won't do it.
Hmm. But he understood.
basically
He
says the
understood that you
church-
can't have just general religious goodwill. He
Sorry,
understood
one more-
that he understood that religion will always have specific beliefs and minutely detailed beliefs.
Yep. But they're at the same level as your bowling club,
Mhm.
right? The church is a voluntary association that can regulate all its members in any way those members voluntarily agree to be regulated under, of course, the rules of the state, right? Who gets to regulate that voluntary association. But it's no different, like I said, than a bowling club, than your paper airplane club, than your drinking club, your jujitsu club, whatever. They're all the same as churches in the sense that they're voluntary associations. Now, we believe as Catholics, the church is a living body of Christ. It's the mystical body of Christ, and you are not voluntarily, in the same sense as most people usually use that word, part of that body. You
It's
enter
not
that.
You who chose me, it was I who chose you.
Yes.
Right.
I did not choose to be baptized. I'll tell you right now, right? I was, I don't know if I was crying, but I certainly wasn't thinking
But you were squirming trying to get
the will and faith of my parents and the entire church around them stood in for mine. And I was brought in by the grace of God to the living body, the mystical body of Christ that's in this world. And thanks be to God that it's supra voluntary. It's beyond my choosing.
Mhm.
And I can never leave it. There's no way out of the church. It's not a voluntary association.
Well, and that certainly occurs to me that in modern American Catholics' attempts to explain, fasting on Friday, not drinking, Lent, right? And God bless them, they are doing the best they can. But it seems to me that many of the explanations of all sorts of things, Lent, fasting, no meat on Fridays, and all the rest of it is, as a practicing Catholic, I do this, right? And we explain it the same way. A guy from my jiu-jitsu club might say, in the 2 months before competition, I don't drink, right? It's like, it's good for the thing that I'm trying to accomplish. Well, fasting, no meat on Fridays, well and good. But it occurs to me that, again, well-meaning Catholics, God bless them, they're doing the best they can. They're trying to give a witness, but they will say the same type of explanation why I'm not living with my girlfriend before we get married, right? Why we believe that, why I'm defending my parents for not attending my sister's wedding that was outside the church, right? Like all sorts of things that basically get played out as cultural adaptations for the group that I belong to. And it seems to me that both of you are saying that while well-meaning is incomplete at best.
Better than well-meaning, there is a certain amount of truth to it.
Okay.
Correct. There's a part of the life of the church is the life of a human organization, human institution, and human organizations and institutions held together by these things. There's a famous study about the Irish in London and the complete disintegration of the Irish community in London and the sociological, of course, it happened 60s, 70s, and 80s. So much of that was tied in with no longer the meatless Friday, no longer the visible observance of Lent, no longer always going to Mass on Sunday. So all of these external markers at the human level, the entirely human level, once those are removed, the Irish Catholic community in London disintegrated and passed away, gone with the wind. So at the human level, there's a certain amount of truth in the observation a wise lady once made to me: if you take away the uniforms, you destroy the Navy. Her point being, they could technically perform all those chores, but if you remove the visible signs of unity, you break it at a human level. So they're not exactly wrong. It's more than just well-meaning. There's an element of truth to that, but we need to go deeper. That this human institution is at the service of nothing short of the Word of God that brings salvation to those who believe. And more than that, that this human institution is in fact filled with the Spirit of Jesus Christ in such a way that it is the presence of Jesus Christ, the sacrament of Jesus Christ on this earth. And if you want to get to know him, come to us. It's that simple. Where the word is preached with integrity, where the sacraments are celebrated with integrity, you will meet Jesus Christ. In meeting him, you will have the way, the truth, and the life. You'll have everything that you will need to be, in a profound sense, happy in this life, which doesn't mean you never fully just without a smile. It means I so disliked that as an early teen. It doesn't mean that. It means being aware of who you are at the deepest level, where you come from, where you're going, what your life is about. So they're not wrong. There is that element of a human institution and those things that hold a human group together. But we must remember this particular human institution is so much more than that. It is the vehicle of the Word of God. It is the sacramental presence of Jesus Christ by the power of his Spirit until he comes again in his glory. Want to meet him? Here we are.
I have a question. I was rereading Democracy in America by Alexis de Tocqueville, and he was saying that he theorizes the reason why Europe lost the faith was because the church was too involved in the temporal politics of Europe. And that's why America decided to separate the church and state as a way for the church not to be in the logistics of politics so much. So that when people tried to change the politics, they weren't thinking they have to change the church. So I learned that, and I didn't know if it's true or not, but I don't know where to go
I
from
have a strong opinion about that.
Okay.
De Tocqueville's work is not so much about America, and I know there are many. I'm stepping on toes here.
Yeah.
There are many professors who will present it as wise observations about America. He didn't spend enough time here to know the country. De Tocqueville's work is about France, and his reflections are about the tormented history of France. For the United States, it comes down to this. One fine historian of the early American Republic asked this question: why isn't religion specifically mentioned? It gets to your Lockean point, but also just prudential, making things work, politics. Why isn't religion mentioned in the Constitution? Is that because it was unimportant? And this historian said, no, it was so important that if you started to mention any specific institution, any specific religions, that would be a deal breaker. So the only way to get the 13 diverse colonies, Congregationalist Massachusetts, former Church of England becoming Methodist and Episcopalian Virginia, Quaker Philadelphia with the Presbyterian backwoods. The only way to get these 13 religiously diverse colonies to sign on was for the official document to step back from any denominational commitments. So it was perceived as a necessity for launching this republic, for the government certainly at the federal level and gradually at the state levels, to be neutral in matters of religion.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the gradually at the state, because if you look at
Yes.
state constitutions early on,
It was gradual.
the religious and specific religious commitments of those states is pretty serious. There's religious tests to be a legislator in early state constitutions, and that
Yes.
eventually that goes away. But the radical separation of church and state that we see in America today is actually not what was happening in the early states.
Because religion was vitally important. But the problem was, if you're attempting to create a constitution for all 13 of these new states, you had to tread very lightly, precisely because it was important. And that has remained our challenge. Tread lightly, but still tread. Insist on our voice without attempting to compel.
Yeah. So Ken, I just want to come back to you here. What is your reaction to a state or a nation, but that has religious tests for participation in political office? I mean, I'm going to just be blunt. Does that appeal to you?
I think it would depend on the character of the nation. I mean, the fact of the matter is that the Catholic Church has taught for most of its history that the state has a duty to profess and protect and promote the true religion. Right? You read De Aeternum Illage, you read Immortale Dei, you read many, many encyclicals all the way up until Dignitatis Humanae and Second Vatican Council, and you just hear that explicitly stated. Libertas Praesentissimum, right? We could go on. What that means in particular is going to be highly contextual. So if you read, those are the sort of 40,000 feet, right? The text from 40,000 feet say the state has a duty to profess the true religion and to promote it and to make it as easy as possible for people to live out the truth of the faith. However, if you look at the application texts, right? There's a text on Milieu de Solicitude on the situation of the church in France, right? Where the Pope is saying, look, you guys, you Catholics don't have to fight to restore the monarchy, right? It's okay to just accept the republic as it is now and focus on having good Catholic people get elected to office, work with the system you have. It's about the quality of the people, not necessarily about the type of regime you have. So the church is very clear to say, look, down in the weeds, right? Any system you guys want to come up with that that actually creates that keeps justice safe and encourages the religiosity of the people and allows the church the freedom to act in the nation, that's fine. So in the weeds, it gives all kinds of latitude. At that philosophic 40,000 foot level, it's very clear about what the duty of the state really and truly is. But it accepts the fact that in some situations, it would be entirely imprudent to add a religious test like that.
Yes.
Right. In fact, I would be
Imprudence is an injustice.
yes, acting imprudently towards your own citizens would be unjust toward them. The state has a duty to do that. So let's say if you magically elected some sort of serious Catholic to the presidency of the United States, right? And magically all of the legislators in the Senate and the House.
It does seem like magic.
Right. And I'm not even saying, yeah, I'm using the word magic right here on purpose. Not even miraculously, right? Who knows? Just somehow all just legislators become these serious Catholics. Well, that doesn't mean that the first thing they do is write a law that says everyone has to go to church on Sundays. It doesn't mean they write a law that says a religious test for legislative participation is that you must be a baptized Catholic. It somehow means that they would have to look around and say, how did this happen?
Yeah.
What's going on?
So concretely, one of the great disappointments of the mid-20th century was how Catholics, your point about the JFK moment, how Catholics elected to public office refused to use their office to enable the church to carry out part of her mission, which is education. So they would not intervene in all of those states that forbade the use of any, they insisted that the the monopoly of secular public schools, their official monopoly on public funds would be undisturbed. So Catholic schools, the Catholic Educational Project would be condemned to struggle in poverty, one endless battle after another to make ends meet, and gradually a losing battle to make ends meet. But leading Catholic politicians, the leading Catholic politician of the early 1960s, made it clear, I'm not interested in this. So the duty means the duty to support the true faith means doing what you can within the bounds of prudence, not to impose, but to allow the church to carry out her mission. Do not accept a situation in which Catholic schools are systematically disadvantaged. Do not accept a situation in which Catholic hospitals are not able to function as Catholic. Do not accept this.
I want to
There has
push
be a
this.
fundamental belief. There has to I think this is what you guys are getting at, but correct me if I'm making a cartoon of it. There has to be a fundamental belief that that the Catholic Church in its members have something to offer every community.
Absolutely. We have the
Beyond
best thing to offer.
Beyond just, hey, you're part of a Pilates club and Pilates is cool, but don't you go around telling everyone that we need to have special tax breaks for Pilates gyms. Right. That there is something really that we have to offer that needs to have force in the way we act politically.
Yeah. And I would
With that word force meaning energy, right? Not compulsion, but
I want to add to this statement of making space. I'm going to push that a little bit farther in a way that I think you'll probably agree with, and you can see what you think of this. I think we need to recognize that all law is pedagogical. All law is formative of morality, and that you can't write a law that is sort of hands off my morality. That's not even a thing, right? No matter what law you write, it will encourage certain behaviors as good and other behaviors as bad, certain behaviors as praiseworthy, others as punishable, right? And so I think the Catholic legislator and all legislators just need to be honest about the fact that every time we write laws, we're encouraging people to become certain kinds of people, right? To have certain habits. And remember, when habits are good, they're virtues, and virtues make us blessed, make us happy, right? Vices are bad habits, they make us unhappy. So we're saying that when writing laws, we're actually making people happier or less happier, virtuous or less virtuous based on the law we write. Just think about tax codes, right? You can get thousands of dollars in a tax break.
You keep saying these things that drive me to drink.
Think about tax codes. You can write $1,000 of write-offs and credits if you buy solar panels, if you improve your furnace in your house, if you buy an electric car, right? That's morally formative. That's telling people what you should value. I'm not saying this is bad, but it is what you should value is being environmentally conscious, right? That's a moral choice, right? Now, why not write a law? If I'm a Catholic politician, why not write a law and try to convince people that this is good using all your rhetorical power, that we should write a law that says we're going to give a tax break to couples based on every 5 years they've been married, right? Now you're incentivizing at the legal level, at the tax level, long-term marriages. Now, there's all kinds of reasons why that law might be a really bad idea, right? But the point is merely to say that we should acknowledge the morally formative power of law and use it to point people in the direction of virtue.
It is unquestionably the case. I'm going to say it unquestionably. To deny this requires seriously sticking one's head deep in the sand.
Yes.
that the law is also the teacher.
No, let me continue. It is undeniable that the collapse of family life in America has had severe social and, yes, for those who consider this the bottom line, economic costs, but especially severe social costs, severe costs in terms of human happiness. It is undeniable that this collapse cannot be separated from the liberalization of divorce laws, that every state legislature, some state legislatures packed to the gills with Catholics, every state legislature passed these laws liberalizing divorce. And yes, your point, law is pedagogical. All of these laws that liberalize divorce said, in effect, and the legislators tried to say, solving their precious consciences. I'm not encouraging divorce. I'm simply trying not to impose my beliefs. I'm simply trying to work practically. In practice, that's hereditary. Fist banging. In practice, these laws had a pedagogical effect. They said to 2 generations of Americans, fine, divorce is good. It's painful, but it's certainly not morally bad. And sometimes it's just the best thing to do. Had a pedagogical effect and a catastrophic social effect.
To the extent that more than 40% of children are born outside of marriage. Right. It's not seen as, if you go look at high school surveys, this was even 10 years ago. You look at high school surveys, people increasingly don't see marriage as the thing that is going to be the stable source for meaning in their life. Right. Why bother? Right. What's in it for me now? What is marriage doing for me? People see marriage as a capstone to put on top of a successful life. Right. Once you've gotten your college education, once you've gotten your sports accomplishments, once you've gotten your economic accomplishments, right? Then you go ahead and find that perfect romantic, satisfying partner. But
with whom you enjoy the rides on the yacht that your
exactly,
successful
yes.
career has.
Exactly. Whereas the theory of marriage propounded throughout human history until very recently, and certainly by the Catholic Church, is that it's a foundation upon which you build a life.
Yes.
Okay, so you get married to someone with whom you've said, you and I are in this boat rowing together in the same direction, and we're going to start here and we're going to get over to heaven together. Whereas getting in the boat with someone who's pretty much almost at the end with you and say, hey, let's ride the last few meters together. It's going to be a blast. And the problem with this,
we're not rowing, we're on a yacht.
We're on a yacht. And the problem with that switch to marriage as capstone versus marriage as foundation is that when the capstone doesn't quite fit right, you chuck it off and find a new one, because this is supposed to be the thing that makes me romantically and emotionally satisfied all the time. It's supposed to be my idol, my perfect final thing on my life of achievement is my marriage.
Yeah.
And that's wrong-headed. No other person can live up to that. Only Jesus Christ can really be the satisfaction in our life. Only the Holy Trinity, right? And so when we ask another person to be that capstone of our life, we've got an idolatry that is set up for failure.
Is set up for failure. Once in college, someone asked me if I would ever get married, because I had definitely committed, and I gave a sort of non-committal. I definitely committed to religious life. Give a non-committal answer, and this person who was raised on sort of overly romantic understandings of things. Well, don't you think it would be deeply satisfying to be the reason for someone else's existence? I thought to myself, if someone thought that I needed to be the reason they lived, I would run away as fast as I could, because I could not possibly live up to that. I'm too weird. I have my weaknesses. I could not live up to that, and nobody could. Nobody could live up to that. But again, I'm glad you said that, the pedagogical effect of law. I know people who, through little fault of their own, have encountered divorce. So I don't mean to be judgmental. In this social situation, all it takes is one party to make the decision to blow it up. One of them made a very interesting comment as after he endured the whole process. And, then after the divorce, there are all the legal arrangements for handling kids and that sort of thing, which just makes everybody more miserable. And he said, he said, Father, it was easier to break the marriage than to break the divorce decree. And it's true. You break the divorce decree, oh my, the law will come down and hammer you. But break the marriage, you just go in, carry out a few relatively modest legal formalities, and it's done pedagogically. And again, and so I believe purgatory is going to be packed with state legislators, just packed, on the assumption that most of them didn't really know what they were doing, but they also didn't want to think about it too seriously. If they knew what they were doing and did not repent, they'd end up in hell because what they did was evil, was wicked. They designed a set of laws that teach people marriage is nothing. Divorce, that's real.
Yeah.
You'd better abide by the divorce decree and the word of the court. Marriage, that's nothing.
That's
That
interesting.
can be done in Vegas.
That can be done.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's law does have a pedagogical effect. And back to something you said earlier, right at the start of this session, the Catholic political leadership, American Catholic political leadership, at the very top level, they adopted the attitude that said, my faith will not guide my political actions.
There was a letter to Catholics in America written by the Pope in the 19th century, right around the founding of CUA. And yeah, and one of it gave just a few pieces of advice. It said, hey, American Catholics, do all right, and it said, your government's got a lot of things going for it. It's not perfect, but it's okay. And it gave a few pieces of concrete advice. One of them was precisely to this point: do not make divorce easy.
Wise words.
And we didn't follow that advice, apparently.
American Catholics. Again, some of these states, every state legislature did it. And some of these state legislatures were packed, with Catholics. It's extremely distressing. I'm glad you mentioned old CUA. At the end of my college days, Monsignor John Tracy Ellis, rest his soul, Professor Emeritus of Church History, Catholic University of America. He gave a final public lecture. Oh my, this was his final public lecture. He let himself go. And he took as his theme the trajectory of the Kennedy family and the parallel trajectory of the Catholic Church in America.
Yep.
And he said, the moment when we seemed to have made it was the moment when we fell. Because in order to make it, i.e. get a Catholic elected president, we had to broadcast the message that our faith will not guide our political actions. And if it doesn't guide our political actions, increasingly, it doesn't guide our private actions. So it's not quite linear, but it's almost a linear graph by most measures. Catholic life in America has declined. I do not think it works. I'm sure it doesn't work to have a quietistic religion that says, when I'm in the privacy of my home, I will be the sweetest, gentlest person possible, just oozing the milk of human kindness and radiating piety to all around. But in business or in politics, I'll do what needs to be done. It doesn't work.
I need to beware.
Again, honesty about who we are, and integrity. I'm a Catholic at home. I'm a Catholic at work. I'm a Catholic in the court. I'm a Catholic in Congress. I'm a Catholic in the voting booth. And that doesn't mean we move in lockstep, because things will be interpreted differently, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you come to prudential judgments. Doesn't mean you move in lockstep, but it does mean that everything we do should be grounded in a living and explicit faith.
Yeah. So how did this happen? It seems to me that somewhere along the line, and Father, you're the historian in the room, so help us out with the history here. But it seems that somehow the idea of Catholics acting in the political realm in whatever nation they belong to got understood as Catholics following the sovereign pontiff in Rome, rather than trying to live out the gospel of Christ crucified. Like how did that happen, right? Like it seems like everyone's worried that, okay, if I'm a Catholic, I'm going to be taking some sort of direct direction from the Pope, rather than both the Pope and I are trying to make the message of Christ crucified present to humanity. How did that happen? Because it seems like both Catholics and non-Catholics kind of agree on something that seems flawed to me, which is, all right, I'm taking orders from the Pope on very, very specific temporal affairs. Father, what are your thoughts?
Story goes that Alexander Hamilton said we can't afford to have Catholics in America because politically they'll always do what the Pope tells them to do. The story goes that John Adams, who knew more about history and religion than any man living, story goes that he responded to Alexander Hamilton, don't worry. History actually shows that Catholics hardly ever do what the Pope tells them. So there's a certain amount of truth to that in history. There is a kind, there's a kind of dialogue about the Pope within the church that can create the impression that the heart of our faith is the Pope. And that does have to be resisted. When I speak of moving, acting, thinking, speaking from a perspective of faith, I mean, yes, the personal relationship with Jesus Christ through the teaching and preaching of the church and with the sacraments of the church. So the Pope is part of that, an integral part of that. But yeah, to say that the Catholic faith is what the Pope says is enough of an oversimplification actually to be a distortion, and that one that does us no service.
Yeah, I mean, the unity, the church has always taught the distinction between the temporal and the spiritual powers and realms. But, you know, if you look in the history of ecclesial teaching on this, you can see some documents that would make folks hesitant. So you take
squirrely.
yeah, you take Unum Sanctum, for example, wherein Pope Innocent Boniface the Eighth, whom Dante treats with some interesting decisions, puts him in hell. But this document,
as in we meet him in Inferno.
This document says that the church has two swords, right? It possesses both swords, the sword of temporal power and the sword of spiritual power, and that the church, in her wisdom, gives that temporal sword over to the temporal power to do on behalf of the church, whereas it rules the spiritual sword on its own, right? And so that's a very strong claim, right? So the claim that, hey, you, King of France, you know that temporal power you wield, you're actually doing that on behalf of the church.
Well,
right?
The King of France's response.
Exactly. And epic. And Boniface VIII, in fact, took a tour of France.
Tour of France. He was kidnapped, and famously slapped in the face by one of the Colonna, which led Dante, who hated Boniface, led Dante to speak of Christ being slapped in the person of his vicar.
Yeah.
The people of Anagni rose up, the kidnapping failed, Boniface returned and died. Then Boniface's successors had to backpedal in terms of the confrontation with France. And part of that backpedaling was, yes, a long papal stay in beautiful southern France.
Yes.
I have, parenthetically, in translations, and my French isn't that good, but I have a history of the Avignon popes written by a Frenchman, and reading, well,
Oh, interesting.
even in the 20th century, the French think of the Avignon papacy a little bit differently than everybody else does.
Yeah, yeah, I believe that.
That's to be in France.
And let me say a couple other things about this too, which is stage setting. So, again, the church has always taught that all political authority comes from God. Okay, and it beat that drum throughout the transition to social contract theory. It continued to beat that drum.
And sorry, and place that historically for us.
So by the time you're into the 16th century and onward, you
Okay,
have
so
the develop-
1500s.
Yeah, you have a strong development. So you said 16 or 15.
More the 17th century, 1600s.
So you have the strong development of the social contract theory, okay, of government, in which the authority of the ruler comes from the consent of the ruled, right? Not from God. And so even during that time, all the way through the 19th century, the church is trying to beat the drum of if you can read this in De Aeternum Illud and elsewhere, that all authority comes from God. Now, that doesn't mean that the Pope is the one who says who rules you. It doesn't, but that's the caricature, that's the cartoon of this. What it does mean is that anyone who rules, and let's be honest, any political community, any community of people has to have an authority in it.
Yes.
And that authority is from God. Whether or not you and I at this table elect one of us to lead, or one of us decrees himself the leader and the others are okay with it, somehow we're going to have a leader, okay? And the one who's in the leadership position, his authority is from God. And that means he's on the hook
Answer to God.
to rule as God would want him to rule. Okay, so his authority comes from God. His office has dignity because he's trying to rule in accord with eternal law, divine law, natural law. And so the church keeps beating this drum and saying, look, you can decide how you want to organize your regime.
All the way back to St. Paul.
All the way back.
The powers, the power of the prince is ordained by God. He does not bear the sword in vain. And then, that's a Pauline expression. This is very direct. Not only do human beings need authority, in the final resort, that authority has to have some muscle.
Yep. And so by the time you get to Rousseau and Hobbes and then Locke, you've strongly got this opinion out there that, hey, ain't nobody in charge of me unless I put him in charge of me, right? I consent to be ruled, and I consent to be ruled in the way I want to be ruled according to the rules that I think ought to rule me. And that means a leader loses power to guide in any way except the way that the one he's ruling wants to guide him to be guided, right?
Right. I mean, and this, I think you see this profoundly in the martial arts world today. It's like, I'm not going to do all this crazy fasting, blah, 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 unless I sign up to be a wrestler under so-and-so's wrestling school. I'm not going to do X, Y, Z unless I am part of the school of Marcelo Garcia, whatever. But it's a profound philosophical stance of, I'm willing to do hard things at the behest of you, but only unless I sign up to be under you. And you're saying that's only appropriate in certain parts of our lives.
We choose to be born. We are born into a social context. If it's a healthy social context, it's a father and mother who are committed to taking care of us. We are born into a social context. We are born into subjection, I'll use that word, to the authorities of that context. We don't like to use the word subjection. Someone was just telling me yesterday about the fantastic notions of gentle parenting. No, we are born into, we are a social context, and in that social context, we are subjected to authority that clearly we did not choose.
Yeah. And again, that's why the church is seen, and Catholics are seen as scary or not to be trusted, because they're going to tell you, look, there's an authority that comes from God, and it doesn't matter what kind of government we have, whoever's ruling, whoever's making the laws, has to make those laws in accord with God's eternal law. It's just the way it is. It doesn't, so that makes us suspect because right, again, we're living in a context that says, no, we decide what's morally good and bad, not God. And so we're going to write laws that fit with our own notions of morality, our own notions of justice, not God's notions of justice.
Good news is that people's efforts to define their own justice, I mean, it's weird to call this good news, but it's true. These efforts crash.
Yeah. Oh, they crash and burn.
They crash and burn badly. Who can we turn to whom can we turn? And we have an answer to that.
It's clear that the effort to define one's own happiness is not leading to human happiness.
Yeah.
We're not getting where we say we want to get.
Yes,
Right.
You know, you touch at the root of my sense of priestly vocation. Looked around the Cheyenne, Wyoming of the 1980s and observed whatever else you can say about people here, they are not hysterically happy. The signs of unhappiness were innumerable, and as I look around, the signs of unhappiness are even more prominent. Again, mental illness, good heavens, soaring rates of mental illness, drug addiction, alcoholism, crime. I mentioned suicide earlier. Just not even wanting to continue society.
Yeah,
Happy-
fertility rates. I mean,
Yeah, a happy society has babies.
Mhm.
An unhappy society says, yeah, it's not worth it. People are not happy. The effort, telling people to create their own happiness, to find their own happiness has failed. And I think we should say straightforwardly, it has failed. It may be what you saw on the poster in your third grade classroom. If so, your third grade classroom lied to you. It failed. But I'll tell you about a light that shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome it. We have to come back to that again and again and again. And the state does have an obligation to provide us the space to do that. Against the-
This is pretty heavy stuff, yeah.
yeah.
To prevent that is to endanger, to attack concretely, directly against human happiness. It's to endanger eternal salvation. And yes, to incur the wrath of God. I laugh a little bit as I say that. We step back from that, but those who exercise authority are answerable to God. And if they exercise authority in a way that attempts to squelch the message of salvation, they incur the greatest possible guilt.
Yeah. I mean, look at Eli in the scripture, right? Why is he condemned? Because he allowed his children, right, to act.
Hophni and Phinehas.
Hophni and Phinehas, yeah, to disturb the worship of those coming to worship the Lord God, and force them into evils. And he did nothing to correct this. And he and his entire line are wiped off the face of the earth as a result. God tells him this very clearly that is the reason he is being punished.
He's doing a homily recently.
Oh yeah.
So whereas there is such a thing, and it's a vile thing, there is such a thing as toxic masculinity. There's also such a thing as useless masculinity.
Yeah,
And that's Eli.
That's Eli.
In the first book of Samuel.
Yeah.
He would not do his duty.
All right. Father, I'm going to lean on you a little heavily on this next question. We've talked several times about the church in the early days of the church, in which, frankly, it came and it went, but persecution really was the order of the day. Participation
Was constant.
the threat of it was constant.
Reality waxed and waned, but the threat was constant.
And so I think it's true to say that you don't have overt participation in the political life of the day by publicly professed Christians. And yet in the mid 300s, I think,
Yes.
you start having Christians look around and saying, whoa, we have to change our paradigm. We've gone from persecuted to perhaps the only people who can run this empire.
Yeah, then you end up with the Codex Theodosianus,
Uh-huh.
where Christianity is the official religion of the Roman Empire
Mm-hmm.
by the by the 5th century.
And then Christians had to wrestle with the question, how is a Christian to exercise political power?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and that specific question did not arise in time of persecution.
There wasn't much political power to exercise.
Yeah.
What is the role of the Christian in times of persecution? Yeah, I mean, theoretically, right? They're not all right. They're not actively at the scaffold, so they still have to be citizens of a nation that perhaps or a state that's actively trying to kill them, right?
yeah.
How do you be a good citizen in such a state? How would a Catholic be
St. Paul tells us,
in Nazi Germany?
St. Paul writes to Timothy, I desire that prayers, intercessions, thanksgivings be offered for all men, particularly for kings, those in power, that we may all live godly lives, peaceful and godly lives. First of all, we pray for them. We do profess our loyalty to the state in all matters in which it may demand our loyalty. So we pay our taxes.
If you get drafted, deal with that.
We know for a fact that there were Christians in military service in Rome during the time of persecution. Again, during the time of persecution, waxed and waned, always the threat of it. So yes, so first we obey the laws insofar as they do not contradict the law of God.
Just because you're being persecuted doesn't give you the right to speed.
Puts it very nicely.
Unless you're getting away.
or even to disrespect the office of the policeman, right? For example.
Exactly.
Yeah.
St. Paul, when St. Paul wrote that to Timothy, who was the emperor? Almost certainly Nero. So pray, respect the office. You're right. Respect the policeman. The fact that you're persecuted does not give you the right to speed. That's a good, that's good. You obey the law in everything that does not go against the law of God. You respect the civil authorities. You do not spit on them. You do not say unnecessarily savage things about them. But when you, and you don't go seeking punishment for religious activities, but when it comes to you, with God's help, the early church had to discipline some Christians who would go out and
Seek that, yeah.
seek martyrdom. You don't know how you're going to handle it. Yeah. So don't seek it.
Even Christ in Gethsemane.
This child's passed for me.
Yeah.
If it comes to you, ask the grace of God, and by that grace, stand your ground. The Elizabethan martyrs, again and again, they were asked to renounce their Catholic priesthood. They were asked to renounce their proper spiritual allegiance to the Pope as Vicar of Christ. They were asked to recognize the Queen as supreme head of the church in England. And again, they said, I acknowledge her as the sovereign of England. Not the supreme head of the church. I can't do that. They acknowledged everything they could that was not directly against the law of God.
Yeah, the Thomas More model, basically, as well. Now, another thing I want to add to that, and this goes back to that epistle to Dionysius that I was talking about earlier with, when you look at that document, it doesn't just focus on, or even really focus at all on, imitate in a time of persecution or when there's a threat of persecution, imitate Christ on the cross, imitate the one suffering. Although you would expect that, or maybe think like, oh yeah, that's the main message to tell people, right? Be like Christ. We've got that in scriptures. We've got that in Hebrews. We've got that all over the place. Epistle to Dionysius says, imitate God the Father. Now that's stunning, because what that's saying to the early Christians the ones who are at threat of persecution or in persecution, it's telling them you have something to give. You have a duty to act from the riches, right, of your Christian faith and give to society, act for its good, right? From a place of generosity, from a place of the riches of the faith, right? You have something to give,
Good.
right? Don't act as if you're just on the run. Act as if you have something to give. Imitate God the Father. Make the world more rationally ordered and more fruitful than it had been in the past.
We have something to offer.
Mhm.
Kent, you're outside the podcast. It's your son is actually headed to one of the academies in our armed forces. What conversations have you had with him about, look, maybe I'm serving under a supreme commander with whom I disagree with profoundly. How am I going to handle orders that I believe are antithetical to the faith? Have you had conversations with your son about that?
Oh yeah, many. In fact, I've been teaching my kids moral theology, and we have this weekly teens group that comes over and we talk about issues like this. And we just read a chapter from a moral theology text that I love on just war theory and an example of of assessing the use of nuclear weapons in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So
Whoa,
these
okay.
kinds of questions are things to talk about. We talk about in the Lasnoski household all the time. So yeah, we've had the conversations, and
Yeah.
Aquinas has got his head on straight. He's he's a man of prayer and deep faith, and I know he's out there to for love of his country and love of his God, and he wants to be a good influence in the armed forces and live a life of integrity there. And he realizes that, of course, that no one can be commanded to act contrary to their conscience, right? And so, a person in the armed services has to keep that in mind, right? And let's, who knows what that means in terms of what kind of assignment you ask for. I mean, you might consider like, well, what if a person were questionable about the use of nuclear weapons at all? And maybe they would not want, they could request not to be assigned to, an ICBM bunker or something like that. They could request not to be in a nuclear portion of the military, right? That would be something, right? There's going to be a lot of nuanced questions, right? Of course, you got vaccines, you have the treatment of prisoners, you have all kinds of issues. What level of discrimination for non-combatants are we going to have in this operational theater, right? Like, what are the rules of engagement, right? These are all the kinds of questions that we need well-educated, faithful men of integrity and women of integrity in the armed forces asking and answering, right? People have been formed by a deep sense of ethics, and I think great Catholics need to be part of those conversations. So
I'm specifically curious, what are the conversations around nuclear weapons producing in terms of results at the Lasnoski household?
well, I'm certainly not going to speak for my son at all. He's his own man, can speak for himself.
Let's get Quinn on the podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, put him on the list.
But what I can say is that the Catholic Church and theologians within the Catholic Church, including the bishops of the United States Conference, during World War II, were critical of the bombing of cities, right, in Germany, and also the fire bombings.
Worth pointing out that before the atomic bombing, the ethical line had been crossed.
That's right.
We adopted a strategy of bombing in Europe and in Japan that did not even pretend. At first it pretended, but eventually didn't even pretend to discriminate. So the whole civilian population, men, women, and children, equally vulnerable to firebombing attacks.
And the firebombing attacks killed as many or more people in the immediate destruction as nuclear weapons. So what we have really here is a question of, did the United States Armed Services follow the principle of discrimination and proportionality, in strategic proportionality and discrimination in their actions? And we can debate about that. The Catholic theologians of the time argued that such actions would not be sufficiently discriminatory, would not allow for non-combatant immunity. Then when you
military agreed with them.
certainly, Yeah. And then when you have the question of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? You basically have to look at it and say, look, if all you had were proportionality, if that were the only question you had, like which one of these actions saves more lives, it seems fairly reasonable to say that dropping the nuclear weapons was proportionate, right? That it probably saved more lives, right?
As in drove Japan to an earlier surrender.
Granted, however, that,
That they wouldn't have accepted a different kind of surrender.
yeah.
Yeah, right. So grant that the only possible option was an invasion
Surrender.
with unconditional surrender, and it seems proportionate, right? So we can grant that. Now, a lot of people say that's all you need in war.
Okay.
Okay, but
No.
the Catholic Church and a lot of secular scholars as well, thankfully, say that discrimination between combatant and non-combatant is also a necessary principle. So it seems that in my personal opinion, that this decision was did not adequately discriminate between combatants and non-combatants, and therefore was not a good decision in line with the law of God. So, that's
just to
my
make sure I
personal-
understand, the proportionality is just, all right, kind of run the numbers. But that second principle, and remind me of the name of it again.
would be
Discrimination. Okay. Theoretically, the death of 100 combatants might be preferable to the death of 10 innocents.
That's not the way that the proportionality principle is generally applied. It would be something like, well, this strategic action will kill 1,000 combatants versus this other strategic option will end up in the death of 10,000 combatants. Why don't we choose the one that only kills 1,000 combatants, but gets a surrender? Right?
Right.
Both of those are going to end in surrender.
Sure.
10,000 deaths or 1,000 deaths. Let's take the one that, accomplishes the same good, surrender, at
Right.
a lower evil. Right? So the principle of proportionality says the goods have to be better, have to outweigh the evils
Sure.
of your decision.
Sure.
Right. But we're not comparing combatants to non-combatants there.
Okay. But discrimination
Discrimination is where you say you may never intentionally attack a non-combatant.
Okay.
You may accept the death of a non-combatant as a foreseen but tolerated consequence, but you may never intend to attack the non-combatant.
World War II bombing was outrageously, by our standards, outrageously inaccurate. In the process of liberating France, our bombing killed many thousands French, but we surely didn't mean to.
Right.
That was the question. The problem was we could not do it accurately.
And if you think of the Normandy strike, I mean, the Normandy pre-bombing is a good example of
Very
this,
good.
right? They were told to drop at a time which basically guaranteed their bombs were all going to drop way too far inland.
Yeah.
Right. And that's just because of the weather, the accuracy of the things. We weren't able to hit the targets we wanted to hit.
So the ethical problem comes in, and this is debated within the U.S. military, to give it due credit.
Right.
The naval chief of staff had, and many people in Eisenhower's staff had the gravest reservations. But the ethical problem was firebombing, where you are not attempting any limited accuracy. You're just going to burn the city and everyone in it.
And you think that
That's what
was when we
So you could
departed
say,
from moral rectitude.
let's send 50 bombers. Let's send 50 bombers and try to hit a factory.
Sure.
Right. And you know what? With the best bombing stuff we have, maybe 20% of our bombs are going to land on that factory. And we'll just,
That would be good.
that's a good day.
That's a good day.
And we'll accept the loss and the cost of all of the other injuries and damage and deaths, right? And we didn't intend those. That's a
Right.
foreseen but unintended consequence. Whereas you just go over and say, look, let's intentionally blow up this city.
We got to terrorize these people.
And they're going to be so scared that they will have to surrender.
No.
Right. That would be a different kind of action entirely.
Right.
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 And again, I think one of the reasons it's such a hard conversation to have is that we are emotionally and rightfully so invested in our country. Like, we want to say America never does anything wrong. right? And I'm American and I love America and I'm a patriot. And if I say that some decision in the one and best war America ever fought, right?
Mhm.
Maybe second to the Revolutionary War or something like
Right.
that in our minds, or the Civil War or something. One of the most clear examples of good versus evil was World War II.
Right.
And if we point to America in that war and say, maybe, you know, they made a wrong decision,
Mhm.
somehow that's unpatriotic. I don't think that that's the case. I think out of
Not the case.
love of
It's not the
country.
case. Because love of country means recognizing your country's greatest good. Uh, you know, one thing that's hard for us to realize is that it's hard for us to admit this, but the United States has never fully recovered moral stature
Hmm.
since the Second World War.
Hmm.
So when we talk about the misdeeds of other countries, something can be tossed back in our face is that I right away think Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but as I contend, the firebombing had already crossed the ethical line.
Hmm.
The United States, yes, Hiroshima and Nagasaki compelled the unconditional surrender of Japan. I was reading an article recently about why the German army fought like hell to the very end. Many reasons for that, but one of them was they felt that they were in a life or their country's in a life or death situation. That wasn't all just Nazi propaganda. Part of that was the firebombing, which would naturally give that impression. I'm not sure that in the European front and European theater, the firebombing did, even at the level of proportionality, shorten the war.
Yeah.
It may
Yeah.
have stirred up resistance. But in any case,
It's interesting.
my point is, we've never fully recovered morally.
Mm.
Never fully recovered our moral stature from those decisions.
Mm.
In whose eyes do you mean? Or do you mean in
Worldwide?
Worldwide?
World's eyes. Yeah, this is something that is brought up when we talk about the misdeeds of other countries.
okay, yeah.
And other rulers who can be very serious. This is one of the things that's routinely
Right. Certainly
tossed back at us.
Vladimir Putin's own rhetoric, he has he brought this up in a speech, right, where he said we were saying, hey, don't use nuclear weapons in this conflict.
You're the only people who have.
That's
Yeah,
exactly what he
says.
says. Yeah. Yeah. So it puts
Exactly.
us in a difficult situation in terms of wielding our influence.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's so yeah, love of country means desiring what is really best for your country. And that means being willing to recognize some errors
Mm.
that have, in the long run, harmed us. As some people, even in the US military, anticipated during the war that, okay, if particularly, I'm more aware of the discussions in Eisenhower's staff that if these have the effect of shortening the war, one critic within the military used the strongest possible language. He said, okay, strongest possible language. Maybe we're shortening the war, but we're also becoming baby killers.
Wow.
Mm.
Is everyone who's there in that city, we're going to kill. Is this who we are?
Mm.
Is this who we are?
Mm.
And yes, I think with due love of your country, you can say, this is not really who we are, and it's certainly not who we want to be.
Yeah.
It's also interesting how at the end of the World War, we kind of imported all the bad people too. You know, like we brought many of the German scientists over. They didn't go to the war trials, you know, it's like we just had them start making our rockets. And then, you know, the CIA is developed shortly soon after, and all these other three-letter organizations that never were supposed to be around. And essentially it just catapulted everything that America was trying to stop, just made it like the starting point for it.
Sarah Taft, Ohio, rock-ribbed, obstinate, conservative, and got a lot of people's nerves, but a man of deep integrity. And he got himself in trouble for this. But he thought that the Nuremberg trials, instead of French, American, British, and Russian judges, he thought they should have found Swiss and Swedish and Mexican judges, judges from neutral countries.
Portugal?
Portugal.
Interesting.
Judges from neutral countries, because he was afraid that the moral impact of the trials could be reduced if they were seen as victor's justice.
Yes. Interesting.
And I think in the long run, I mean, there's no question, right, of the guilt of the,
Of course.
but
Yeah.
It was a 1-inch putt, but
it was a 1 inch, but
who holds the putter?
well, you know, this is leaving aside for a moment. No, I won't leave aside for a moment the fact that Representative Stalin's Soviet Union sat in judgment about crimes
Wow.
against humanity. Good grief.
Wow.
But it's prevented us, not entirely, it's obstructed us from really drawing the full moral lessons from the law, from that war. Yes, the Axis needed to be defeated. But the overall lesson of value of human life, dare I say human dignity, that these things were endangered by actions of people other than the Axis as well. And too easily we sort of assumed then, and perhaps have continued to assume, that because we stand for, and with sincerity, because we stand for certain ideals of human freedom, and we do embrace certain ideals of human dignity, therefore in defense of those ideals, we can do whatever is necessary. That is the path to moral ruin.
Yeah, if the goal of a just war is to bring about justice, to bring about right ordering of society, to bring about true peace, then it would seem that a means of doing that that is in itself unjust would be contrary to the end.
Yes.
Right? And so well, we need to make sure we're not thinking, well, there's just some arbitrary rules that America or some countries have to follow in war. No, it's not about arbitrary rules. It's about prosecuting a conflict in such a way that it really does bring about the end that one is seeking,
Yes.
right? Which is true and honest harmony and peace, right? Among that you maintain honest and harmony and peace among yourself, but also you're really aiming at it socially out there in the world, and you can't bring it about by doing something unjust, right?
Well, I think that's the perfect place to
Well said.
wrap this up. Yeah, well said, Kent. Yeah, I mean, we could keep rolling for much longer, but unfortunately we have to let y'all go. But Kent, just before we go, where can people, you're going to be at San Damiano, but where can people get more Kent Lasnoski? Do you have your own online channel or anything that we can point people to?
Well, as of now, it's the website of the college, sandamianotrades.org.
Yep.
And we are eventually going to have our own newsletter.
Okay.
I strongly encourage people to go there, sign up, put their email in, and they can get all of the information and pieces of media that we'll be putting out from that website, right?
Yeah. Well, excellent. Yeah, well, we'll certainly make that resource available to folks. And Father, thank you for jumping in and joining us spontaneously. Yeah, we'll be sure to have you back on the cast here as soon as possible. But Kent, whenever you come back to Lander, we hope that you can make a little time to come back to the gallery and get on the Green Dragon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.